Good morning. Good morning. Welcome everybody. Day of All Things, celebrating that on Tuesday. Actually, my topic is, I believe it's a timely topic, and I want to talk about an event. I've mentioned it before, but I want to share the story again and talk about the lessons that can be learned from it. And it's the story about an event that took place in World War II. And it was the sinking of a heavy cruiser called the USS Indianapolis. Oh, this man, Charles McVay, was the commander and captain of this ship. And he was decorated. He got a Purple Heart. He's Charles McVay III. And his father was a very successful admiral in the Navy also. And he was the commander of this ship. And this ship sailed on July 16, 1945 from San Francisco with a very important, they were on a secret mission. And this secret mission carried them past Hawaii and from Hawaii to an island called Tinian on July 26th. And they delivered this top secret cargo to this island, and then they left that island and sailed toward Guam and passed Guam, and they were going to participate in the invasion of the island of Japan. That was their thinking. These soldiers were prepared. This was near the end of World War II. And on the way to this mission, close to midnight on July 30th, a Japanese submarine spotted them. And it was commanded by a commander named Hashimoto. And he launched torpedoes. And at least 2 of the torpedoes hit the ship, but possibly 3. The ship was carrying 1,192 sailors. And in 12 minutes, the ship was underwater. It sank completely. It went like this, and it went down. And it's estimated that about 900 of the sailors went into the water. And the waters were very warm. This was the Philippine area. Out of that 900, only 5 days later, when they were rescued, only 317 would still be alive. And what happened is the story, if anybody ever saw the movie Jaws, the reference to this event took place. And no one was looking for these men. No one knew that this happened. They were found by accident, because the mission that they were on was secret. Their mission was that they delivered the atomic bomb that would be dropped 7 days later on Hiroshima to end the war. And as they secretly left the island, their ship was not escorted. Under normal circumstances, a ship of that size always traveled with an escort. And even the commander of the submarine that sank their ship said later in testimony that he was shocked and surprised when he came across this ship. He thought certainly this must be some kind of a trap by the Americans, because why would they send this ship out here alone? And he didn't initially attack the ship because he was concerned that his submarine would be attacked. These men suffered greatly. And it was a tremendous sacrifice that they made. Out of almost 900 men, then at the time of their rescue, only 317 or 318 were actually able to be rescued. The way they were discovered is there was a pilot who was flying with a plane, and the plane had a problem with its antenna. And it was one of these planes that can land on the water. And the antenna came loose, and he was with his crew, and he said, listen, let's fly down lower. I've got to fix this antenna. So he flew down lower, and he was trying to grab this was one of these antennas that just, it's like a string that hangs out the back. And he opened his bottom, the bottom doors on the plane, and he was flying over the water, and just as he was grabbing or trying to reach for the antenna, he looked down and he saw something. He saw some kind of oil slick. And that led to the chain of events that eventually these men, heavy cruisers, and they were rescued. But this story became a major issue to the American public because this was the greatest tragedy, the greatest naval tragedy in American history ever to happen during wartime. And it happened at exactly the end of World War II. And so here you see the New York Times, and then in the bottom you see this report of this heavy cruiser being lost. And this disaster was a great tragedy. And I read the story of the whole events and all of these events that took place leading up to it. And it's an incredible story of suffering and sacrifice and courage. But the main part of the story I want to talk about is what happened afterwards. Because you can imagine the public hearing how at the very end of the war this great tragedy happened. They were very frustrated, especially anybody connected to any of the soldiers, the sailors that died. So the families were very upset, and they demanded that the Navy do something about this. Well, the Navy had already looked into this situation. They already had checked it out. But they said, okay. And there's one particular admiral, Admiral King. And for whatever reason, he had this attitude that someone is going to be blamed for this. The public demands a restitution for this, and someone has to pay. And so he pushed to get this court-martial of Captain McVeigh to take place. And in so doing, one of the things that the Navy did was they went to Japan and they brought Admiral Hashimoto to the trial. And they brought him to testify against Captain McVeigh, explaining how he had been able to sink this ship because the captain of this ship had been negligent. He hadn't been following exactly the right directions. Now, there were two issues that were of concern. One was that he had given the order to abandon ship at the proper time. And it was determined that because these two torpedoes had hit, the ship sank in 12 minutes, there was chaos all over, and the order to abandon ship, everything happened according to the best the captain could do. The second issue was an issue about his ship zigzagging in the water. And in the Navy regulations, it states that the captain of a vessel that might be in a situation where it's dangerous, at his discretion, he can decide to use these zigzagging maneuvers, but that he's required to use these maneuvers, if the ship is exposed in the middle of the day. Well, this was at midnight, and it was cloudy, and there was no information given to this captain that there were submarines in the water that were dangerous. He was sent out without an escort, and later it was found out that the High Command of the Navy had information about a Japanese submarine in the area, and he did not receive that information. He was not told. And no one reported when this ship didn't show up at its rendezvous, nobody reported that the ship was missing. So this ship was sunk. So the testimony of this Hashimoto was presented in court. Now, you think about this. Think about this. If there was any person alive who was responsible for the sinking of this ship, who intentionally and purposely, with their whole being, made the final decision to sink that ship, it was this man. He actually resisted. He wasn't even going to attack the ship initially because he thought there might be other ships in the area. But after he observed long enough, he made the choice. Now, his story is very interesting because he was responsible. He was present at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese actually attacked Pearl Harbor, and they sank the vessel that gave up the most American life, the Arizona. You know, the Arizona is in Hawaii. Other than the Indianapolis, the only other ship that was ever sank that had a greater loss of life was the Arizona. But the Arizona was situated in Hawaii, you know, not in warfare. This was a ship in warfare. Admiral Hashimoto, at that time, was responsible on a submarine. The Japanese were experimenting with special two-person submarines. They were kamikaze-type subs. And two pilots would be in this very small sub, and they would go out, and they were supposed to attack the ships at Pearl Harbor. And General Hashimoto was in charge of one of these subs. And he sent these two Japanese sailors out into Pearl Harbor. Of the 5 subs that were sent out, none of them did anything. They completely failed their mission. And all of the soldiers on every one of them died because they, committed suicide by blowing up their submarine, except the 2 soldiers on Hashimoto's submarine. They were banging into they couldn't get into the harbor because the submarine this little sub didn't have the proper tools or equipment. So they ended up wrecking their sub, and they went to shore. One of them committed suicide. The other one did not commit suicide, but was captured. And he is the first Japanese prisoner of war during World War II. And he was directly under the command of Captain Hashimoto, who later became the commander who sank the final ship in the war between Japan and America. He lived to be 91 years old. Later, he became a Buddhist monk in Japan. And he was shocked and surprised. His family died in Hiroshima. And the Americans came to take him and bring him to, he didn't know where he was going. He thought, they've come to kill me. He was so shocked to find out he was brought to give testimony against a commander of a war vessel. And he later testified that when he gave his testimony, the people that were translating were not translating correctly. That he said, I did not speak English very well, but I understood that they were not really interested in everything that I had to say. They had an agenda. This one particular admiral, Admiral King, was determined to find some reason to accuse Captain McVeigh and to find Captain McVeigh guilty. And ultimately, that's what happened. Captain McVeigh was found guilty. Criminally, he was found guilty. Even after he was found guilty, Admiral Nimitz and all the other people that were involved said this is really wrong, but it didn't matter once this decision was made. So on November 24th of 1999, Commander Hashimoto wrote a letter to Senator John Warner. And he said, because what happened is, to back up the story a little bit, Captain McVeigh left the Navy, and then he struggled, okay? He really was depressed, and he had some kind of a divorce, and in 1968, he committed suicide. He went out to his porch with a gun in his hand and a little toy soldier, a sailor, and he committed suicide. And so the men, the survivors of the Indianapolis, for years and years, have always made an effort to try to exonerate him, to exonerate his name. And so even they became connected to Hashimoto. In 1999, he wrote a letter he said, "I hear that your legislature is considering resolutions which would clear the name of the late Charles Butler McVeigh III, captain of the USS Indianapolis, which was sunk on July 30th, 1945, by torpedoes fired from the submarine which was under my command. I do not understand why Captain McVeigh was court-martialed. I do not understand why he was convicted on the charge of hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag, because I would have been able to launch a successful torpedo attack against his ship, whether it had been zigzagging or not. I have met many of your brave men who survived the sinking of the Indianapolis. I would like to join them in urging that your national legislature clear their captain's name. Our peoples have forgiven each other for that terrible war and its consequences. Perhaps it is time your peoples forgave Captain McVeigh for the humiliation of his unjust conviction." Actually, if you think about it, it's really Captain McVeigh who would need to forgive the Navy for what they treated him. But this is his Japanese English. He became a monk. He died at the age of 91, and there were sailors from the Indianapolis that attended his funeral and honored him. The person that wrote the book I read, he wrote it afterwards. His name is Captain William J. Toty of the U.S. Navy. And he was saying in the very last sentences that he wrote, referring to this situation, he was talking about how General Hashimoto was treated when he came to America. He was treated almost like a celebrity. He was given gifts. He was treated very nicely and yet, this was the very man who made the conscious decision to destroy this ship. And yet, this Admiral King and some people in the Navy completely ignored this fact and focused on this captain's simple decision. A simple decision in the middle of a war to not zigzag, because the sky was dark. But at some point the moon came out, and the process of zigzagging was very uncomfortable to the sailors. They didn't like it, and so they didn't do it. And again, there were so many things that the Navy had failed. They failed to inform him about this commander, about the submarine that was in it. There were so many ways the Navy failed this captain and this ship. So many mistakes they made. But they picked out one decision that he made. And they made him they burdened him with the lives of all of his soldiers by accusing him because of that one decision. Captain McVeigh, in contrast, a man who earned a Silver Star for valor and a Purple Heart for wounds received in battle, died on a lonely, sullen, gray day, a death suffered at his own hand, feeling unloved and unforgiven by the country that he gave so much. It seems that we sometimes treat our enemies better than we do ourselves. And this really brings me to the lesson and the object and the reason why we want to learn from this kind of an event. I want to talk about the principle. What does the divine principle say about good and evil? In the exposition of the divine principle, there's only, the principle of creation is one paragraph. It says an act or the result of an act is considered good when it fulfills God's purpose of creation. This takes place when a subject partner and object partner unite through the harmonious and spirited give and take of love and beauty, become the third object partner to God, and form the four-position foundation. On the other hand, an act or its result is called evil when it violates God's purpose of creation by forming a four-position foundation under the dominion of Satan. If something is under the dominion of Satan, then it becomes evil. Then in the fall of man, in this one section, it says good and evil seen from the viewpoint of purpose. It says, having already defined good and evil. Define good and evil refers back to what we just read. Let us further examine the nature of good and evil from the viewpoint of purpose. Had Adam and Eve loved each other as God intended and formed a four-position foundation centered on God, they would have established a good world. But when they loved each other with a purpose contrary to God's intention and established a four-position foundation centered on Satan, they ended up forming an evil world. This demonstrates that although good and evil elements or actions may take the same form, their true nature may be discerned through their fruits. They yield their fruits in accordance with the divergent purposes they pursue. We find many cases where an aspect of human nature conventionally considered evil is, in fact, good if its purpose is directed toward the will of God. Let us take the example of desire. Desire, which people often consider sinful, is actually God-given. Joy is the purpose of creation, and joy can only be attained when desire is fulfilled. If we had no desire, we could never experience joy. If we had no desire, we would not have any aspiration to receive God's love, to live, to perform good deeds, or to improve ourselves. Without desire, therefore, neither God's purpose of creation nor the providence of restoration could be fulfilled. An orderly, harmonious, and flourishing human society would be impossible. Desire. We all desire. And that's okay. God designed and created us to have desires. Desires, being part of our God-given nature, are good when they bear fruit for the purpose of God's will, or are evil when they bear fruit for the purpose of Satan's will. This presence, this personage, or this character of Satan has to be present in order for evil to exist. On this basis, we can deduce that even this evil world will be restored to goodness and become the kingdom of heaven on earth if it changes its direction and purpose according to the guidance of Christ. The providence of restoration may thus be interpreted as the process of changing the direction of this fallen world from its current satanic purpose to the purpose of building the kingdom of heaven God's ideal of creation. So if people are doing something that is trying to move them toward accomplishing the ideal of God, helping to establish the kingdom of heaven, then we are moving from evil toward goodness. Any standard of goodness set during the course of the providence of restoration is not absolute, but relative. In any particular period of history, obedient compliance with the doctrines expounded by the prevailing authorities is considered good, while actions in opposition to them are considered evil. It's considered good to obey the law. You have to obey the law. It's good. 200 years ago, the law said that black people and white people were not equal, and that black people and white people couldn't be together. They had to have separate things, including, bathrooms, fountains, everything. So it was good to follow the law, wasn't it? Well, it was relative goodness. It was relative to a certain standard of truth that was available to people conscientiously at that time. For the adherents of any religious tradition or school of thought, complying with the precepts of its doctrine or philosophy is good, while opposing them is evil. But whenever a doctrine or philosophy undergoes a change, its standards of good and evil will also change according to its new goals. Similarly, if an adherent converts to a different religion or school of thought, then naturally his goals and standards of good and evil will change accordingly. Jesus came 2,000 years ago. His standard of goodness, his standard of relationship with God, his understanding of truth, his knowledge was different than the traditional Jewish understanding. And they could not adjust. 40, 50, 60 years ago, true parents came and began speaking and teaching and introducing us to a standard, an understanding of God, an understanding of good and evil, an understanding of restoration of history that no one had ever heard before. And we, who connected to it, who believed it, who trusted that it's the truth, our standard of understanding what is good and what is evil transformed and changed. And this transformation and this change is taking place dramatically today. Conflicts and revolutions constantly plague human society, mainly because the continual changes in standards of good and evil as people seek to fulfill divergent purposes. Yet, throughout the endless cycles of conflict and revolution in human history, people have been seeking the absolute goodness which their original mind desires. Conflicts and revolutions in fallen human society will inevitably continue as people pursue this absolute goal until the final achievement of the world of goodness. The standard of goodness will remain relative only as long as the course of restoration continues. We can hope and look forward and expect that a time will come when we won't have to debate, argue, and be in conflict with each other. That a standard will come that we will be able to recognize and agree to, so that goodness will finally triumph over evil. Once the sovereignty of Satan is expelled from the earth, then God, the eternal and absolute being, transcendent of time and space, will establish His sovereignty and His truth. In that day, God's truth will be absolute, and hence the purpose which it serves and the standard of goodness which it sets will both be absolute. This cosmic, all-encompassing truth will be firmly established by Christ at his second advent. So for some people, oh, this is scary. Here comes the judgment. God is absolute. He's going to do it. It says it right there. He's going to establish that standard, and then once that standard is established, but if we really understand, look at these words. Once the sovereignty of Satan is expelled from the earth, this promoter, this one who goes around constantly lying and stealing and cheating and convincing people that the only way you can get ahead is by doing all these heinous acts, or the only joy you're going to experience is by hurting other people, whatever it is. When the presence of this influence is gone, then God, the eternal and absolute being, will establish his sovereignty and his truth. So we want to ask the question, by what power, by what authority, by what pressure, by what ability will God establish this ideal? What is the force that will bring this ideal into play?
Love.
What kind of love?
Absolute true love.
True love. When it talks about a sovereignty of God, it's not talking about some kind of an external authority saying, you know, these is the law, this you got to follow this law. No, it's talking about something so profoundly internal and so profoundly deep. True love. In the presence of true love, evil will melt. Look at what happened. Captain Hashimoto. You know, look at what's happened between Japan and America. When love is present, forgiveness, love, compassion, enemies become friends. True love. True love is what is going to save the world. When Satan is expelled, when this presence of evil is once and for all gotten rid of, and God will establish his sovereignty and his truth. What is the truth of God? What is it that God wants from you or me? He wants you to be like true father and go to prison for 2 years and 8 months. He wants you to follow Father's course and suffer and sacrifice. No. Not at all, actually. That's all the past. It says that this conflict between good and evil will continue as long as the restoration is going on. True parents have told us that time of restoration is completed. Now is the time for the power of true love. The power of true love is going to change the world we live in a way that you and I can't even imagine. And we can see it. We can see examples of it. Maybe not through the media, maybe not in the public eye, because the public, in a way, John Doe, the public, is kind of the last to get it right. If you look at things from a distance, like the public did with Captain McVeigh and the sinking of the Indianapolis, they only saw the result. Oh, all these men died. You know, this is terrible, this is awful. But yeah, it was terrible, it was awful. But when you look at the circumstances, the situation, who do you blame? Who was involved? How did this happen? I mean, honestly speaking, you would have to even blame God before you blamed anybody else. All these situations and circumstances that came together. Even the rescue of these men was a miracle. You know, when those men, some of them were being flown back to the mainland, and they were on a flight, and they were complaining. You know, they had suffered. They, you know, maybe 100, 200 of them were killed by sharks. Some of those men were killed while they were being rescued, while they were being pulled out of the water. Sharks attacked them and killed them. One little boat You know, these men went delirious. They were crazy. They had 4 days. They had no water and no food. They were in 90, 100-degree weather, floating on these, you know, some of them were in life jackets. They weren't even in, they were submerged up to here, and the life jackets had become so soaked. They suffered. One of them even murdered the other one. They hallucinated. They thought they were, you know, oh, you're trying to kill me. And while they were being rescued, there was one small raft where a couple of men were on it, and one of the men, instead of letting the man get on board, he thought this guy was attacking him, and he took him, he pushed his head under the water, and he killed him. This is the reality that happens. What are you going to do? You're going to judge him? Blame him? Of course. On some level, he's guilty of murder. But when these circumstances, these situations, people make decisions under extreme situations. Captain McVeigh made a very simple decision. He didn't go this way. But in all other situations, he was an honorable man. So, we need not fear God. We need not fear the coming of the kingdom of heaven. It is not going to be like traditional religious people believe it's going to be. They really do believe that Jesus Christ is coming, and he's going to be the general, and he's going to say, look, this is the way it is. You don't like it, you go to hell. But those who accept it, you follow me. That's terrible. That's awful. All of us, our original minds, rebel against that. We say, I'd rather go to hell. Many people really. But it won't be that way. True love. True love. This is what true parents have taught us. This is why we're here. This is who we are. We are the people who are supposed to now set the example of love, forgive, love, unite. So I want to bring this closer to home. Let's talk about a sports analogy. Has anyone watched any of the basketball, the NBA, or the NHL, you know, the Stanley Cup, the National? The other day I was watching, this person, Curry, LeBron James, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Stephen Curry of the Golden State Warriors. 2 minutes left, and 3 or 4 minutes left in the game, and Steve Curry has the ball in his hand, and all he has to do is make a basket, score 3 points, and they'll be ahead. Suddenly, he tries to pass the ball behind his back, and instead of getting the pass, it goes out of bounds. Now, Cleveland Cavalier gets the ball, and now, with 2 minutes left, they start scoring points. So you look at this situation, and in that moment, if you're a fan of Golden State Warriors, how do you feel towards Stephen Curry? You go, oh, damn you cost us the game. You did it. Why did you do that? That one moment. But I watched the rest of the game. I've been watching. There was a whole game. Anytime, any of the other players could have scored more points, right? It's not all on him in that moment, even though to us, in that moment, we see only that one moment. We see that one mistake. We see that one incident. And we think to ourselves, why did you do that? But if you watch, you think about it, he took a chance. He took a chance. He's playing a game. He's trained himself all his life to play basketball. And the only way he's going to make the shots that everybody loves is if he's willing to take a chance. And so sometimes he takes a chance, and guess what? It doesn't work. There's failure. It doesn't turn out like you want it to turn out. What do? You're going to just focus on the failure? Focus on that one moment? When in fact, if you weren't willing to take that chance, if you weren't willing to make those mistakes, if you weren't willing to be mocked, to be accused, or to be, misunderstood, you will not become a great player. If you don't take the chance. I see now when I watch sports so many times, I see so many events like that. There's moments. And if you isolate the moments, yeah, you can accuse. And it's the same thing, it's with our life. Our lives are the same way. You cannot isolate moments. There's much more to our life than meets the eye. Not only is there the decisions that we make consciously, what about subconsciously? What about God's providence? What about God guiding and inspiring us without our knowledge, without even our awareness, putting us in situations and circumstances that even we have no control over, for His reasons, for the providence? Father went to prison many times. He was unjustly accused. It's very interesting. When before True Father went to trial, there had to be a grand jury. A grand jury had to get together, and they had to be presented with information, and they had to make a decision. Is there enough evidence here that this guy, Reverend Sun Myung Moon, might have committed a crime? If we feel there's enough evidence that he might have committed a crime, then we, the grand jury, recommend that you take him to trial. So how did the grand jury get this information? Well, they called on someone named Mr. Kamiyama, who only speaks Japanese. And so the prosecutors interrogated, Reverend Kamiyama, and they took his testimony. And at one point, they even got rid of a particular translator because they didn't like the way he was translating, and so they got another one. They essentially did exactly the same thing that happened to Mr. Hashimoto. The prosecutors already had a desire and an idea of what information they wanted. And so they intentionally and they purposely took information from Mr. Kamiyama in broken English and, with a translator that was not trained in the nuances of law. And that's the information they took. And based on that information, then that's why Reverend Moon was eventually accused and taken to trial. And then similar things happened during the trial. The point being, if we have the wrong intention, if people intend to find fault, if people intend to do something against someone, and if they are in a position of power and authority, they can manipulate the situation. That's evil. That's wrong. It's a lie. It's not being honest. It's not being truthful. Comedians today no longer want to go to the colleges and entertain college students. Jerry Seinfeld, comedian Jerry Seinfeld, said in a recent radio interview, he refuses to do college shows because today's students are too politically correct. The comedian told Colin Cowherd that he's constantly being warned to stay away from colleges because they are too PC. Seinfeld said teens and college students fail to appreciate the gist of comedy because all they want to do is use politically correct terms that they fail to really understand. They just want to use these words. That's racist, that's sexist, that's prejudice. Said the Seinfeld actor. They don't know what they're talking about. He even talked about his own daughter. He said, my wife says to her, well, the next couple of years, I think maybe we're going to want to be hanging around the city more on weekends so you can see boys. Seinfeld recalled how his daughter shot back with, that's sexist. It's funny. I heard this, and I put this slide. One morning I put this slide in, this presentation, and I got into my van to go out selling my wood roses, and I turned the radio on, and I said, well, it's news time. I'm going to just listen to Glenn Beck briefly and see what he's talking about. And I turned the radio on to Glenn Beck, and the first thing he started talking about is he had a reporter from the New York Times who was going on and on about how he's frustrated because of the political correctness in the country and how it's destroying the ability of even journalists to be able to get information now, because everybody is so afraid of saying the right thing or the wrong thing. Well, why am I talking about comedian? You know, a comedian is, this, in a way, the very same as a sports player. A comedian has to take chances. You know, comedy is, think about, have you ever actually watched a stand-up comic? You think that's easy? They have to take chances. Sometimes they have to be spontaneous. So, in order to be spontaneous, there has to be an environment of trust, of freedom, a willingness for the people involved to give them some leeway, right? In a sense, you think about it. Sometimes they say a joke and, man, they tell the joke and the whole place is just silent. You know, can you imagine that? Dead, they feel dead. The environment of trust, the environment of love. You want your children to grow up to be good people. You want your friends to be good people. We want our society to be good. How will it become good? We can only get people to become good if we create an environment of true love. True love. That means we can't judge people. We can't look at just this one particular situation. Especially, well, here, I threw this in here. Recently, someone found a bunch of Einstein's letters. This is a particular rapport that Einstein was having in an article. He wrote about his opinion of God, his belief in God. He said, I have repeatedly said that in my opinion, the idea of a personal God is a childlike one. He wrote to a man who corresponded with him on the subject twice in the 1940s. You may call me an agnostic, but I do not share the crusading spirit of the professional atheist. I prefer an attitude of humility corresponding to the weakness of our intellectual understanding of nature and of our own being. I think Einstein was a very sincere, honest, and obviously very observant person. So what is he saying here? Very simply, he's saying, you know, I hear you talk about God and being a person, but I don't believe that God is a person. But I'm not a crusading atheist because I am humble enough to recognize the limits of my intellect and the limits of my capacity to even know myself. Because I'm that humble, I will not make a final judgment. One of the final issues that demands that we become people of true love today is the whole issue facing the world concerning sexuality and the relationships. But one thing we have to remember, you know, recently I saw a big newspaper article, was it Sweden? Or which country made gay marriage legal? Ireland. Big full-page newspaper article. But on the same page, in smaller print, it was a little article asking the question, why, when people are asked what percentage of the population is actually gay, or homosexual or lesbian, why do they always get it wrong? Why are they always saying it's like 15%, 20%? Why don't people understand, or why do people not know that the actual percentage of people who are really experiencing that issue, that situation, is very small? And does it matter? The answer to the question is yes, it makes a big difference. Why? Because we have to be honest. You know, I'm guessing, I'm assuming, most of us in this room, this issue doesn't have much to do with us. Because we're not gay. Now, that's not a value judgment. That's just a simple observation of reality. So, when I'm with gay people, and I do spend time with gay people, I have friends. I've gone to gaming night at the LGBT. It's not an issue for me. I'm not feeling, oh, you know, your behavior is so wrong, you know, blah, blah. Not at all. I simply recognize that I don't share this experience. I don't understand your situation. You know, I'm not saying, you know, the same thing like Bruce Jenner, who went through this transformation. I watched the interview with him initially. And in the beginning, I was so inspired, actually. I felt, wow, here is a person who is being very honest and open about a situation that they faced when they were a young boy. Can you imagine, if he had parents who had true love, who really loved him unconditionally, and then he came to them and said, you know, I have this feeling, I have these desires, I don't know what to think about. Is that really a problem? It's not really a problem. He has a personal situation inside himself. There's a confusion. There's something he doesn't understand. But in the environment of true love, okay, let's figure it out. Let's figure it out together. Let's work it out. Let's find out what the problem is. Do you think God can't solve any problem? Do you think God doesn't understand what is going on inside of a person if they have certain kinds of feelings or desires that are, you could call them unnatural or different or against the grain or whatever? Of course, God can help the situation. But where is God? God is only where there is true love. We, as unificationists, have to create the environment of true love to the extent that everything can come out. Everything has to come out. One of the reasons why I think there's so much problem is because some, not all, but many gay and lesbian people are very militaristic, very aggressive, very anti-non-gay. You know, it's like they're kind of angry at people who aren't like them. That's a common problem. We face it all the time. We get frustrated with people that are different. We have to start thinking different. We have to realize that it's not evil anymore. It's different. Something is different. And if it's not promoting the principles of creation, which fall into just there's three simple things God wants from us. He wants us to individually become a true person, our mind and body. Let's find harmony. Let's find true peace deep inside ourselves. Individually, let's become a good person. Then, the ideal is, as an individual, I should become part of a family. Not just part of a family, I should actually be involved in creating a family, extending the family. A man and a woman should come together so that they can have children. Because the only way God multiplies, I'm saying himself because I don't have any other, that's the problem. The only way God multiplies his and her being and becomes another, makes a human being is through that relationship. It's very simple. That's how it's worked from the beginning of time. So if people don't want to participate in that relationship, okay, maybe that's their choice. If they have some desires that are leading them away from that, okay, let's deal with it. But let's deal with it with true love. And then the third and the final point that God wants is what we're celebrating today. The day of all things. God wants us to have an appreciation of our environment, of the fact that we even exist. Find joy and happiness in the creation. You know, the creation of things, the things that we have, the food that we can eat, you know, sleeping in a warm bed at night when it's cold, sleeping in a cold bed at night when it's warm, whatever, you know, having a car to drive, you know, any external thing we should appreciate and find value in it. The things of creation. And we are alive on this earth for only maybe 100 years. That's all. Some of us less, some of us more. And the only reason we're here is to individually become a true son or daughter of God, mind-body unity, expand our family, become part of the family, and then appreciate the creation that God designed and created for us. And if we do that, then when we pass away, when we die, and enter into our eternal life in the spirit world, we will be happy people. That's it. Today's celebration of Day of All Things, or when we celebrate Parents' Day, when we celebrate Children's Day, these days, we're celebrating the three blessings. Very simple. True love. True love, love yourself. Love yourself. We have to learn to be so confident in ourselves, even though we're fallen people, we're confident enough in ourselves that we give love to other people. Instead of judging them, instead of accusing them, instead of being afraid of them, instead of demanding that they change under our circumstances. Okay. I don't know your situation so well, so perfectly, but true love. Without any, requirement. Like, I'll love you only this long, or I'll love you as long as you, behave the way I want you to behave. No, unconditional love. The individual, the family, and love the creation. And I hope and pray that these are the lessons that we learn from our true parents. That's what they came to do. But remember, and I always remind us of this and point this out, Father's life was the life of dealing with the fallen world. He had to live and work. True parents had to make the conditions in the fallen world, level by level, step by step, stage by stage. But so the standards of good and evil, the things that many of us did in our own life, the way we behaved, the way we even treated each other under some circumstances was correct then, but it might not be correct anymore. Because the providence is in a different place. We must become people of true love. We must be absolutely clear that God is our parent and that we live eternally and we need not fear. And we can love anybody, our neighbors, our friends, our enemies, doesn't matter. And labels, this political correctness and labels. I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm black, I'm from Greece, I'm a part American Indian. It's okay. It's okay to be part of a clique. It's okay to be part of a group. Oh, I like to ski, so I can hang around with people that ski. I like to watch sports, so I'm hanging. That's okay. Don't get me wrong. But our identity, the profound and deeper part of our identity, is that I am either a son or a daughter of God, first and foremost. And the essence, the core of our relationship has to be centered on true love. True love. And like Einstein, we have to still be humble. I do not understand a lot of things. I have made many mistakes in my life. I am not the example, the standard of true love. I am just a person who has learned from true parents and who is making his or her effort to try to achieve this standard. In the meantime, as long as I'm alive on this earth, I could make mistakes. And when I do, I'm going to deal with them. We're all going to deal with our mistakes, whether we like it or not. But if we create an environment of true love, then everything can be healed much quicker. Anyway, in conclusion, this day of all things and this message, I really hope and pray that we realize how blessed we are, how fortunate we are, that we are in the time when God is establishing His sovereignty and His truth. His sovereignty and His truth is being established. And it is not, a judgmental, destructive, controlling environment. It's actually quite the opposite. And that's even frightening. There's incredible possibility, incredible freedom. But freedom comes with responsibility. So we're free to act, but we will be held responsible for the way we act. And that's okay. That's okay. Please join me in prayer. Our Heavenly Parent God, I really hope and pray that these words will inspire us and guide us. I know they're not just my words. I know you are the eternal parent of mankind. You desired this time, this day when true parents would come and they would establish a standard of true love. That no matter what the environment was, no matter what situation or circumstance they found themselves in, they would only love people. They would only be concerned about your providence, about your will, about your heart. And they would make every effort to protect your providential will and to establish the base or the foundation for the kingdom of heaven, which is creating a true family centered on true love. We know even true parents' own sons and daughters don't always make the right decisions. They don't always live a life that's centered on true love. They don't necessarily respect or love their parents properly or correctly. As any of us here have the wrong attitude toward each other many times. We fight with each other or we struggle with each other because of our own viewpoints. But help us to be patient and loving. Heavenly Parent God, thank you. Let us not forget that you are the designer and creator of the universe. That you are the essence of true love. And that your spirit, your existence, your reality is where we all come from. So let us be confident. Let us be clear. Let us be absolutely sure that if we make an effort to practice a life of true love, it will bring benefit to others and to ourselves. Thank you. I pray that you'll bless each and every family here, each and every person here, and help us to really connect to you as we go out from this place at the end of this day and continue our lives. And bless our true parents, especially true mother who has the responsibility and the position of being the final, making so many final decisions about the unification movement and the direction it will go. We pray for true children. We pray for all blessed families. We pray for every person on this earth. Each person is valuable and precious to you. Every single life matters to you. You are the parent of each one of us. You have always been our parent, but we've never been fully aware of it. But now we know. We know that the divine principle teaches us clearly that you are our eternal parent. And through true parents, you have been liberated to love unconditionally all of us. Thank you We offer our prayers to you and report this as Blessed Central Families, and collectively, and also myself, John Pace with Sharon Pace's Blessed Central Family. Amen and adieu.